Welcome everyone to the January 11th. Let me let a few more folks in here. The January 11th SAAA meeting, which actually is our annual meeting. So we have a few things we have to take care of, such as the elections and whatever. We're going to have a lecture from Andrea White, the city archaeology, and she's going to talk a little bit about what has happened in St. Augustine in the past year. But before she does that, I just want to go over some of the things that SAAA did last year. Obviously, it's been a rough year with the COVID, but thanks to all the members and the board, we had a fairly decent year. We conducted all our scheduled meetings. I let a few more folks in here. We had all our scheduled meetings, although they were on Zoom, but we did keep the schedule. We did hold our annual Christmas party at the Lambia House after we got the ghost out of it. And we also, at that meeting, we'll talk a little bit about this later, we awarded the Richard Todd Service Award to one of the members. We established the Eugene Lyons Scholarship Fund, and we donated $1,500 to 3 very qualified individuals. We did publish the quarterly newsletters. We actually came up with a mission statement, which we hadn't had in the past. We became the official stewards of Fish Island. We did conduct a tour at the St. Francis Barracks. And at the conclusion of the tour, we had a toast at the Officers Club for the 25th anniversary of SAAA. St. Johns County, it was their 200th anniversary, and we did participate in 4 events with them. We did determine the location of our next historic marker, which we will be announcing soon, so stay tuned. Down at Crescent Beach, when the ship or the boat was found, we helped out in securing it and some of the archaeology work. We also assisted the city of St. Augustine Archaeology Department, both in the lab and in the field. And as far as our membership goes, we increased our membership pretty dramatically. Actually, since the organization was founded 35 years ago, the financial dues came in the highest it's ever been. And what we did was we reached out to some people who had been members and were delinquent through a few emails and finally a US postal mail. A lot of the people who were members came back. And we also, in doing that, we purged our membership list. So we have probably in the area of 250 members in the organization. So we did very well on that. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to turn it over to Nick, our treasurer, and he'll talk a little bit about the finances for the year.
Okay, am I unmuted?
You're unmuted, and I think your screen is up there. Let me let a few more folks in. We had a couple of latecomers. You should be good to go, Nick. You see your screen?
I am. Okay. Basically, this is just a very simple form that shows 2020 and 2021, the total pieces of income and expenses in that time. And as Don said, one of the big news is here, and best news, I think, really, in many ways, is that our membership, we haven't raised the membership for a long time. The membership dues haven't been raised probably since around the turn of the last century. But the amount of money we've brought in on that has increased, and this year it increased, as Don said, dramatically. And it's good to know that even in this middle of this COVID period, that the community is supporting the organization in the way they have. In fact, the previous high was about 15 years ago, and this represents probably a 5% increase even over that year, let alone any previous year or subsequent year. So it's really been good from that standpoint. And in fact, that's, as you probably know, is the main way that we raise money for this organization. Our main thing we do is we get dues, we keep our expenses at fairly modest level, and we go forward, and we don't have to spend a lot of time doing fundraising and that sort of thing. We try to do some, but we don't have to do a lot as long as we have the support of members. And the other piece of news, which Don also mentioned, was that the Eugene Lyon Fund got started about a year ago. And thanks to the commitment of SAAA and the donations from members and others, we were able to give out 3 different $500 scholarships, or not scholarships, but pieces of grant to 3 different levels of people interested in and involved in archaeology. And as the year goes on, we'll be doing 2 things. One is we'll be asking for donations for next year, for the upcoming year of the fund, because we want to see this continue every year. And the other thing is we'll be hearing, I think, from all 3 of the people who were received the grant this year, and we'll have at least 1 talk and probably a couple of presentations about some of the research and activities that were found that came through because of this grant. So we're glad to be able to help with these projects and help with the individuals involved in them. And because of the amount we brought in this year in dues, even though the SAAA had encumbered $500 to go toward this fund, we actually came ahead by a little bit more than $500 with our dues, so that was a wash. So one of the things I added, and I think it doesn't quite show up on the bottom. I don't know if this goes up high enough. At the bottom, I added a line that is how much oh, there we go. Our balances, as you can see as you get down toward the lower right, is $10,213. But some of that is encumbered, and that means it's been committed to some project or other. The first one, which we've done all along, really is commit funds to the marker program. And as Don said, we'll be announcing fairly soon what the next marker will be. But we have $1,800 that are committed to that fund. And that's really almost enough for 2 new markers. And the other thing is, as we said, we've committed $500 a year for the first 4 years of the education fund, Eugene Lyon Education Fund, to get it started each year. And as I just said, the first $500 has been balanced already, but we have $1,500 for each, $500 for the next 3 years. So when you subtract those 2, we still have unencumbered money, which is just a little under $7,000. So we're in good shape financially. We'll be able to carry on, and there's a possibility that we'll be hosting a statewide conference. That's still up in the air, but that's a possibility. And if that's the case, we'll have some funds to seed money to do that kind of work. It'll get reimbursed one way or the other, but we have some funds to do things with, and that's always a nice thing. So that's it. We're basically in good shape. And if there are any questions about it, you could either ask or bring it up at the end of the meeting, or just email me directly. My email is on the website, and you can get to me that way if you don't already have it. But It's basically N McAuliffe without the E on the end, NMCAULIFF@yahoo.com. If you have any questions or comments, that's all I have to say.
Okay, Nick, thank you very much. The next thing on the agenda is we're going to talk a little bit about the elections. We do have the elections on the annual meeting in January. Before that, I just want to explain to the folks who don't know how the board is made up and the terms and whatever. The elected members of the board, we have a president and a vice president, and that is a 2-year term. There's 5 board members, and each of those board members have a 3-year term, and they're normally staggered so we don't replace them. The other 3 offices we have 2 secretaries that have to be elected. One is the corresponding secretary, and the other is the recording secretary. And the last person on the board is the treasurer, of which Nick was, obviously. Behind the scenes, there's a lot of other people who do work. We have a number of committees. We have a membership committee. We have market committee, people working on a newsletter. We have a nominations committee. And if anyone's interested, we're always looking for help. Just reach out to any of the board members or myself, and we'll be more than happy to entertain you jumping in, and I'm sure we'll find something for you to do. With that in mind, we have a couple of members that are leaving because their term is up. And the first one is Robbie Boggs. She's been with us for 3 years. She's been invaluable. She's the conduit where we get information to and from Flagler College. She's the interface with FPAN. She was very active on establishing the Eugene Lyons Education Fund. To do that, they had to come up with criteria and forms and had to rate people who had come in, and it was quite a job, and anyone connected with that did a very good job. And she's also very involved with FPAN as far as cemeteries, and has solicited from SAAA volunteers to go out and help with her to preserve some of them. So what I'd like to do at this point, if you bear with me a moment. We have a certificate for Robbie, but unfortunately I can't hand it to her. You probably can't read it on the screen, but she's done so much for the organization. It's all on that screen. And I'm sure we probably left a few things out. I would hand it to her, but obviously we're on Zoom. The next time I'm maybe in Aldi's shopping parking lot where I met her the last time, I'll hand it to her. But Robbie, you want to say a word or two before you leave?
Well, thank you very much, Don. That is really sweet. And I will look forward to receiving my certificate in the Aldi's parking lot.
Okay, very good. You're going to be missed, but you're always welcome, like I said, and I'm sure we'll be looking for you for some guidance between the college and FPAN.
Absolutely. You know where to find me, and I am still more than happy to help you figure out how to navigate the Flagler College and be a connection with FPAN. So I'm more than happy. You know where to find me.
Okay, and you're always welcome. There's 2 other members of the board who will be leaving. Well, I shouldn't say leaving, but they're leaving their post. One of them is Janet Fittipaldi. We call Janet Fitty, and the other is Courtney Crum. Neither of which I'm going to make a presentation to, not because they did a bad job, but because they're staying with us, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Let's take a look at the slate of people who the nominating committee has come up with for the annual election. For the president and vice president, they came up with the same. So I am still in the president's slot, and Nick Budsberg, who is the current vice president, is also slated in the vice president slot. Some of the other incumbents, Suzanne Dixon, who is our secretary. And by the way, Suzanne is the one who got the Richard Todd Award at the meeting for the people who were not at the Christmas party. She's been the secretary for the last 10 years and done an outstanding job. The other incumbent who the nomination committee has selected would be Nick, and Nick McAuliffe, who will remain in the secretary position. Janet Fitty and Courtney are going to switch jobs. Courtney's going to move off from the correspondence secretary, of which she's held, to a board member, and Janet Fitty is going to take on the role of the corresponding secretary. There is one other individual who's now with us, David Casserell. He was on the board a few years ago. He served a short term filling in for a vacancy, and he is the new board member. So that is the slate that the nomination committee has come up with. And let me ask, is there any additional nominations from the floor? If so, you can unmute yourself and we'll hear them. Okay, hearing no nominations, I'll just ask for the secretary to cast one vote, and the election will be completed. Suzanne, do you want to do that officially?
What do I do?
Just say that the election is official.
The election is official. All nominations were accepted.
Super. Okay. Robbie, one of your last tasks, you got anything going on with FDAN?
Yeah, so Donna mentioned the cemetery recording projects that we do, and I have one. I mentioned it a couple months ago, but there might be some people on this call that didn't hear about it. But I'm doing a cemetery recording project, and what that basically is going into historical cemeteries and really just recording what's there. So we identify every marker and record the inscription and the condition and measurements and take photographs, so we can really get a snapshot of what that cemetery is looking like in that moment. But it's very detailed, and but we have a lot of fun out there too. So this current one is at Pinehurst Cemetery, which is in West Augustine, and it's a historical African-American cemetery established around 1910. If any of you are familiar with San Sebastian Cemetery, it's located right behind that. And there had recently been a huge cleanup and a combination with the Latter-day Saints and the West Augustine Improvement Association. And they cleaned up that cemetery at least enough that we can get out there and do this project. So I'm going to be out there this Thursday, starting at 10 a.m. We're usually out there about 2 hours, 10 to 12, and pretty much every Thursday after that until the project is done. So I will put my email and phone number in the chat. So if anybody's interested in joining this Thursday or any future Thursday, or just has any questions about what that entails, I'd be happy to answer your questions. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Robbie.
Oh, could I add in for a second? Just I'll put it in the link, but the Timucuan Science Symposium that often features Keith Ashley and Buzz Tunin and others. I'll put that registration in the chat. I think it's January 28th. And then also in February, there's the State of the Reserve at the GTM NER, and we'll be having a special presentation, and we'll be unveiling the preliminary results of the modeling of the Guana Peninsula that's being done by Dr. Lindsay Cochran. So I'm going to put both those opportunities in the chat. And sorry to jump on Robbie's tails. Excellent work, Robbie.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. The highlight of the meeting, we're going to bring up can you name the artifact? We'll leave that on for a couple of moments, and then we'll remove it and go on with the lecture. I don't know what it is, so I'm in the same boat you folks are. Okay. Let's get rid of that and just want to introduce our speaker, Andrea White. She's got over 25 years experience in archaeology. She specializes in urban and historical archaeology. Just to give you a little bit of a background, she has her bachelor's of art from the University of Florida. She got a master's from William and Mary College, and recently, I guess about a year and a half ago, she got a PhD from Louisiana State University. So we've asked Andrea to come on and talk a little bit about what has gone on in St. Augustine archaeology-wise in this past year. So Andrea, it's all yours.
All right, can everyone hear me? Yeah? Get some,
I can hear you.
all right, I'm gonna share my screen. Hopefully this will work out great. And I'm gonna take a minute to. Can everyone see that?
I can see the screen.
Can you see my
Yes, I
laser
can see it,
pointer?
Andrea. Yep.
Yes, we can see it.
Good.
Excellent. All right. I was gonna try to get my video to move on over, but I don't know if I can do that with just without everyone else, because nobody else wants to see their faces. But I cannot seem to get it to go by itself. All right. Well, for this evening, I want to thank you guys for having me every January. It's always fun to be able to come back and share some highlights of what our past year was like. I feel like every year is a little bit of a blur. And this year is another one of those beginnings of a new normal. So happy 2022. It's going to be a mouthful. We've even been worried about the number of twos that we will have left over on our photo board. So hopefully we won't have any test unit twos, featured 22, level 2, because we might be short of all those twos. But with that said, we've had a very busy 2021. It's always fun to go back and kind of recap everything. I feel like a broken record every year when I was like, this year was crazy busy and we had so much going on, but things did not slow down here in the lovely city of St. Augustine. It was another banner record year for the Planning and Building Department with permit applications. So we bore a lot of that brunt as well, with lots of projects happening, lots of pools and additions and a hot real estate market. So everyone's trying to capitalize on the market right now. And we are just getting quite inundated with projects. So tonight, I thought I'd only highlight 3 of the projects we worked on last year. Everything is very preliminary. We have been in the field so much that we really haven't gotten a chance to do the bulk of what archaeology is. I know a lot of people think the field work, and I'm probably preaching to the choir with this group because you guys are so familiar with the archaeology process, but the field work is only a small component of the whole archaeology process. So a lot of times we get to do, 25% of the process in the field, and then we have to come back and analyze and interpret and do all those other things that are involved in archaeology. So a lot of what we've done this year, because we've been in the field so much, everything is very preliminary. I feel like I need to have a little asterisk up next to everything that we're talking about, because we really haven't had much opportunity to even, in some cases, even wash some of the artifacts that we brought back from the field, much less analyze and begin our interpretations. But one of the things I always like to do is start with the Archaeology Preservation Ordinance. It is the whole purpose of our program. This year, we're celebrating 35 years of the Preservation Ordinance being in existence. So that's a pretty fun milestone for us. We've done close to 1,000 projects in that 35 years. So the ordinance is one of the few in the country that apply to both public and private property, and it's all tied to the planning and building permitting process. So you're going to be disturbing over 100 square feet of ground disturbance, I guess, anything below 3 inches, which is not a lot, then, and you're within one of these lovely archaeology zones right here, we have 18, then your project would require archaeological review. That doesn't mean that we go out and dig on every single property. It all depends on what the project is, the scope of work, what we know archaeologically about that area. Some, of course, require months in the field, and some projects can be done pretty quickly. So without this preservation ordinance being passed, which really came out of a grassroots effort from the community, including sort of the beginnings of Best AAA, we would not have the opportunity to be able to learn what we've learned through a lot of these projects. So I always think it's important to go back to our roots, so to speak, and talk about how important this preservation ordinance really is. It's very unique. So yay. And it's what gives both Catherine Sims, our other archaeologist, and myself the opportunity to go out and learn more. So one of the types of projects I've talked about over the last several years have been these mission communities, these 18th century refugee mission communities. And I keep coming back to them in the last few years, partly due to the volume of work that we've had. Because we've had so many projects, we've gotten a lot of opportunities to discover some information we did not know about these mission communities. And so each year we're finding more information about where these missions could have been located on the landscape, as well as just connecting the dots, these disparate little bits of information that we might get from an addition on one particular lot. And then a couple years later, we go back and then we do a pool on the neighboring lot. And we start to connect all of these little bits of information and be able to get a better handle on where some of these missions are located underneath the urban landscape. Some of them have been well studied, like Nombre de Dios and of course La Punta, but some of them have still been very evasive. We don't know where these mission communities really are. We have a rough idea where they might be on the landscape. And some of our archaeological zones were specifically called out in terms of where they're located, in hopes that they would delineate where these mission communities are. Just as a quick refresher, some of y'all are probably familiar with the Spanish mission system that was started in the 16th century, went into the 17th century and stretched to Mission St. Luis and Tallahassee. It stretched up the Georgia coast. And eventually, though, that mission system collapsed. The British were encroaching onto the territory in the Southeast. They established Charleston, South Carolina, and eventually, along with their native allies, started attacking these missions. And the mission system, in all intents and purposes, was destroyed during 2 major sieges during 1702 and 1704. So you get a wave of immigration of refugee native peoples coming to the protection of St. Augustine is, of course, one location. There was also evidence that they went to the Apalachicola area and Pensacola. Then you get a second wave of migration to the St. Augustine area after 1715, which is associated with the Yamasee War, which was a pan-Indian war across the greater Southeast. It's probably not mentioned much in many of your history books, but it really affected the whole composition of Native peoples and their European allies in the Southeast. So there was a second wave of migration of Native peoples that came to St. Augustine. And as you can kind of see from this slide that I've used before, there are at least 6 communities, refugee mission communities in the city limits of St. Augustine that we know about. There was a lot more. Some of them were occupied very sparsely, but there's sort of 6 that we know of. And one of the best maps we have is this Antonio Arredondo map, which I want to not call your attention to this weird, large shaped planned defensive fortification that was never built, but we know that this is our Castillo de San Marcos right here. And this is the walled community of St. Augustine. It's sort of the opposite orientation that we're used to looking at St. Augustine, where we kind of have it with the waterfront at the bottom of the map. So here's the Matanzas Bay right here. And from this map is our best sort of idea of where these communities were located on the landscape. It's great that it's kind of hard to see, but there's little teeny huts and some of the churches and some of the readouts that were located in these different communities. And I've kind of just highlighted the ones that are on the map. We are not sure how idealized this map was, how accurate it was, of course, when it was drawn, because it had a different purpose. The purpose was to argue for building this much more substantial fortification system. But it does give us a rough idea of where these villages would have been located at this specific time on the urban landscape. 3 years later, we know that there's another siege in 1740. And so where exactly these communities end up after that siege is something we're still learning about. So as I was saying, some of them, like Palica specifically, and a little bit of Talamato and La Costa, we know less about where they are on the landscape, and we found less archaeological evidence of those missions, especially Palica. That one's kind of been elusive, you could say. It as along with Pocatalaca, this area is Lincolnville right here that we know of. So we found some evidence, or the city, former city archaeologist has done some work associated with Pocatalaca. But Palica has been very evasive until this year. And this was the first time we've ever found definitive features and actually excavated units at Mission Palica. So pretty exciting stuff. It, of course, was in Lincolnville. We've been doing a lot of projects in Lincolnville for obvious reasons. There's a lot of gentrification, a lot of building that's happening in that community. And so we're narrowing down a lot more about the missions, especially in the Lincolnville neighborhood. So Mission Palica was occupied primarily by Timucuan-speaking people from the Mocama Nation. And it's, according to some of the historical documents, some of these folks relocated from Mission San Juan del Puerto, which would have been up just north of Jacksonville, and we're sort of familiar, a lot of work UF has done up there. And it's also the same kind of area that Kingsley Plantation is in. So those people moved down and were relocated down to Mission Palica. And then there is evidence that there was sort of an attached group of people that came to live in association with Mission Palica. And those were unchristianized Chichisi. And the name sort of implies that these folks might have been Yamasee from one of the lower Yamasee towns known as Chichesi Town. And so they would have migrated after the Yamasee War, sometime around 1717, to this area. So we have, while at the mission communities, there was lots of different groups of native peoples living in these communities, they tended, at least initially, to kind of clusterize around kinship groups and kinship ties and ethnic ties. But it's possible we had two different groups living sort of within the same mission, at least according to some of the historic census records. So we got to do some of our first projects, first work out here. And it was really one of the first times that we were able to actually bring our volunteers back into the field. So it was a really fun time. It was spring. It was a fabulous open field. This is just off Cedar Street that we were working. Even the property was bearing its fruits. It had the most delicious peaches growing on a peach tree. It was just a very wonderful, fun, early summer, late spring kind of project. So it was fun to get back together with everybody and us having a little more fieldwork camaraderie. We even had a sponsored field cat we nicknamed Mansell, that you can see in one of those photos, that loved to visit us and kind of keep our morale up. So it's great to be back in the field, open up some units, and actually document some really cool and curious archaeology. So we found evidence of some type of structure, which was fantastic. This was just really new for us. We were very excited. We had a series of post holes that we were able to kind of connect some dots. And so we started doing what we do, and we started excavating. And then things got a little interesting. We definitely had a plow zone that was on top of the site, but luckily in this particular area, the plow zone didn't go as deep as some places have in other parts of Lincolnville. So while there was a little bit of a plow zone, there were intact features underneath that plow zone. And some of those features were a little interesting. At the bottom of some of those post holes that I just showed you in the previous slide were parts of articulated chicken remains. And we know that these were intentionally placed at the bottom of post holes for some purpose. What that purpose is, that's open to a lot of interpretation. It is, at least in our current brief research, sort of unusual to find chicken remains buried intentionally at Native American sites. It is not common, but it has been documented at sites with people of African descent. And more often, that's sort of something you would see. Sometimes it's found at sites of the enslaved as sort of a ritual offering that may be associated with some structures and things like that. But this was kind of curious. So we had chicken feet, we had parts of the chicken, we had chicken without heads. This was in more than one post hole as well. So this definitely is an intentional behavioral practice that we're seeing. Turns out what we thought originally might have been a structure that you saw with those 3 post holes in the previous photo turned out to be a superstructure, which was likely open over a well. We, of course, just as seems to always happen to Catherine and I, we just barely catch the edge of the well construction pit, but we never get the actual well shaft. It just seems to be our lot in the last couple of years. So these posts would have supported a superstructure that would have been over a well. And this is not the first time that the archaeology program has documented probably a communal well with a superstructure over it. That was also documented at La Punta, which is sort of at the south end of Marine Street, if you're familiar with that area. So that was curious. We, like I said, were unable to actually get into the well construction pit to kind of compare it to the La Punta well. It was right along the property line, so we couldn't really dig into the neighbor's property to fully investigate the remains of this well. But we at least were able to determine that it was a well instead of an actual structure. So it is very curious. We have another project coming up this year that backs up to this property, not the property that the well, of course, would be located on. That would be too simple, but an adjacent property. So we're hoping that we'll be able to get a chance to look and investigate a little bit more about this specific mission. One of the other things that was interesting, but also sort of made the project more complex, right? So we have very tiny articulated chicken remains at the bottom of posts, but this site had been open for a long time. It didn't look like there had been any historical activity associated with Lincolnville, no modern construction or construction from the last 150 years on the property. However, we kept finding articulated remains of dogs and other pets and fish. And we were like, every time we'd have to stop and we'd have to very carefully excavate and figure out, is this something colonial or is this something maybe from the last 50 years? And it was at the very end of the project, after we had probably documented at least maybe 10 animal burials, that the neighbor mentioned that the former adjacent owner used to raise dogs, hunting dogs. And we determined, well, that's probably what happened with the dogs once they, didn't make it. So we had a sort of an interesting pet cemetery activity going, sort of superimposed on top of these ritual chicken burials. So it made for a very interesting project. And of course, took a little extra time because excavating tiny bones takes a lot of very careful excavation. This is where you're using toothpicks and wooden tools to really kind of excavate and expose the bones. As you can see from this now award-winning photo that Catherine took that was not staged. It was actually taken by it's a reflection of how neat and tidy Catherine excavates. So it was a great photo. And you can see some of the tools, especially these wooden tools that are used when it comes to excavating such small, detailed, very fragile and friable animal bone. So what's interesting about this project, of course, is, what to make of these ritualistic, remains that we're finding. Are they ritual at all? Why are they intentionally done? We don't have any Spanish records that talk about any African presence living at Palika, but we know that there is people of African descent in the larger Spanish world. So could they have been freed or escaped enslaved people that were living with the native people? We're not sure. So we're very hesitant to say any sort of interpretation of what these specific posts and what's the offerings that are left or what's at the bottom of these posts. So that's where a lot more archaeology and a lot more contacting colleagues and research can hopefully maybe shed light on some of this. So it's just very intriguing, and it's just one more tiny piece of the larger puzzle of what's happening in these mission communities. Even still, very exciting. It was fun. We'll be going back later this year at some point. So hopefully we'll have some more research to talk and share when it comes to these specific missions. Of course, field work takes a lot of time and energy, but that's only, as I mentioned, the very beginning of the process. We had tons of paperwork that we are still working on associated with this project and others, as well as, processing the artifacts and analyzing. We still have soil samples that we need to process for potential ethnobotanical analysis. So we got a lot more to go on this project. Another one, keeping in the neighborhood of Lincolnville, was a really cool 20th century project. Normally, we don't get too excited about 20th century archaeology, but as time marches on and we're now in 2022, sites that are over 50 years or older are sort of how the federal government at least can qualify historic sites. So, before you know it, some of us might already or be close to maybe actually hitting that 50-year mark. So we are just as interested in 20th century archaeology, especially archaeology related to the people and the inhabitants of the historic Lincolnville neighborhood. So this project was known as School Number 2. So it didn't have any fancy name associated with it, but it was one of the earliest public Black schools in St. Augustine. And if many of you are familiar right here with the Lincolnville Museum and Cultural Center or the Excelsior High School, this predated that, but is in the same location. So it's, was torn down and then Excelsior High School was built. So we had a project across the street. So this is actually Moore Street right here. This is School Street, which doesn't exist anymore. And then MLK would have been right along the margins over here. It's just off the map, Martin Luther King. So this top up here is north. So we had this one project that was for a new home that was going in the area. And so we started some of our research and we found out that the the junior high and graded school that was called school number 2 was built in the late 1800s. So we're talking about this school right here. And that eventually, in another word, a way to accommodate the number of enrolled students, they built an annex over across the street on this property. So we were pretty excited that we might get a chance to actually discover some cool archaeology associated with the Lincolnville neighborhood. So one of the things in our historic research is that starting in this is an article from 1919, parents were starting to complain and petition the county school board for a new school because there was overcrowding and that the current school just was unsuitable. So by 1924, they were starting to build the new Excelsior, demolish the existing school and build the new Excelsior High School. So the annex building, which is our project area, continued to be used as sort of an overflow building for quite some time during the Excelsior High School time period as well. And the actual building right here still exists. It was actually taken and flipped on the lot and is now oriented this way and is undergoing some extensive renovations. So this building is still standing. It's just been moved and flipped around on the lot. So we had an opportunity to do a few shovel tests associated with the new home construction that was going in this location. And immediately when we were doing some shovel testing, we started finding some artifacts, school-related artifacts. And I remember actually Pat was with me, I think the first day, and we were like, whoa, we're finding, the ends of pencils and some pencil leads. And, it was like a few little artifacts here and there, and we were getting all excited. And then a couple of days later, Catherine was out there with, I think, Pat again, and it was just gobs and gobs and gobs and gobs and gobs, hundreds of artifacts. And we basically found a trash pit. So we opened up, I think, a 1.5 by 1.5 meter unit and found 2 giant trash pits chocked full of artifacts, just nothing, barely any dirt, just tons and tons and tons of artifacts. And this is what happens when you get into these 20th century sites. The volume of material culture and the rate of deterioration hasn't taken as long or hasn't had enough time to sort of deteriorate several things. So it was pretty intense how many artifacts were coming out of these.
I'm not ready for that. Whoa. Yeah, that's what I was like. Oh, I'm not ready for that yet.
Yeah. So anyway, we started getting
the age is catching up, and that's what everyone talking.
I don't know if we had somebody else
he's got his temporary license
talking at the same time. I don't know if I can have the ability to mute other folks. But anyway, if you can just mute yourself if you're not muted, that would be great for everyone else. So anyway, we ended up going through these 2 trash pits that were full of discarded school-related debris, which was just a little mind-blowing, but really cool. I mean, it's hard to pin down children in the archaeological record, but here we are with tons of items that we know are being used by school kids. And it was just fantastic. I never thought I'd get so excited about a 20th century site. We were finding pencil ferrules. That's what the ends of pencils are actually called. Most of the wood had decayed, but we were still getting pieces of the lead. And there's a bunch of different types of ferrules, kind of indicating the different types of pencils that were on the site by different manufacturers. We were finding, of course, ink bottles. This is an example of one of the ink bottles that we found, tons of ink bottles. But we didn't find a lot of evidence of ballpoint pens or even sort of, these were dip pens, dip ink that you would use, and you would take a sort of stylus, right? And you would take a nib. We still use these in the lab today, and you would dip it in the ink and then you do your writing and then re-dip and keep writing. So kind of a step up from a quill from back in the day, but something that was very common in terms of a writing utensil. We were not finding a lot of fountain pens or ballpoint pens, even though they had been invented during the time period. And now we've narrowed down the time period to around the mid 1940s. But they were very expensive, those fountain pens with the refillable little pieces, tubes of ink. And so that's why we're not seeing them on this site. This is something that children probably weren't using. And especially if you're lower socioeconomic status, they would have been very expensive to have and for your daily school work. So those were pretty cool that we were able to find a lot of ink bottles and of course some other school related artifacts. These are a lot of different paper fasteners. This is part of a Fay paper clip. This is a Brad, and then even staples. So a lot of traditional stuff that you kind of expect to be associated with education and school related items, which was really cool. Tons. We actually found chalk. That was something that you may not think would preserve in the archaeological record, but we found that. But some of the less common items, which makes sense once you start thinking about them, is a lot of things related to lunch, right? So we were finding gobs of tinfoil, probably from wrapping food in tinfoil or aluminum foil. We were finding all sorts of foil candy wrappers. This is a Charms wrapper right here, which these types of things were really helpful and narrowing down the date of disposal for our trash pit. Lots of different soda and other drink bottles. Here's another example. This is Milk Bot. I think it says vitamin D on there, or maybe it says no, B1. I can't quite read it on my screen. But a lot of disposal from probably lunch and other snacking activities, which was totally expected once you started thinking about it. Some of the other more or less common items we were finding was paint, which there was a lot of bone char that we have sent away. We found a lot of containers and we weren't really sure what was in them. But working with Mark Warner who's an archaeologist at the University of Idaho, he has a colleague in the chemistry department and says, send us your stuff and we'll get students to analyze the contents for free. So we've gotten some of the results back, which a lot of them turn out to be bone char, which is pretty common in paints, some glues and things like that, which was surprising to us. We have a couple that we're really curious about that we haven't gotten back. So I think they're on tap for this spring semester's chemistry students to analyze. We also found things like pesticides, which are no longer toxic, but things that were kind of curious, wouldn't have thought, but it makes sense that, you had a lot of school maintenance type of activities that were happening and occurring on the property associated with the school number 2. So some really cool stuff coming out of these types of projects, or this specific type of project when it's school related. But it also means there's a lot of stuff. And so you can see here, there's Pat and Nick and David just processing. I think all of this is just one provenience, one FS, one level from one of the trash pits, and we had multiple levels. So it's a lot of stuff to both process. It's also a lot of stuff to think about in terms of curation. We're used to curating bones and metals and ceramics. And this is a little different because you're getting all sorts of plastics and potentially toxic things that, maybe there's lead paint on one of those pencils. So a lot of things that we have to kind of think about in terms of how are we going to curate these, or even mixed things. You have a metal lid screwed onto a glass jar with the contents in the jar is still there, and we're not sure what that contents even is. So they present a lot of interesting challenges. But it also gives us an opportunity to learn a lot about what life was like in this segregated school in the first half of the 20th century. So we're pretty excited about being able to do some more research and analysis and hopefully do a little more collaboration. We worked a little bit with the Lincolnville Museum and Cultural Center, as well as the St. Augustine Historical Society was fantastic in helping us get some more information about the school itself. Surprisingly, there is very little archival information that we've been able to find. Part of that could have been that some of the school board records were not curated and kept or purged. You know, there's retention schedules, and after so many years, you purge those documents because they're no longer relevant. They also suffered, I believe, a flood too. The school board did at some point in their past. So that could be why we don't have as much historical information at our disposal about this particular school and about some of the activities that were going on. In talking with some of the residents in the neighborhood, most of them were not alive during this school occupation, or at least some of the earlier time periods of the school that predate the Excelsior High School. So it's not like we can go back on some of the oral histories either and ask people. So we still have a lot of research to do, but it's pretty exciting, and it's a great reminder of how important education is, I think, to communities. And I think even just arguing for the school or for a new high school really helps shows the perseverance and the resilience of the parents in the Lincolnville community. So, and not just parents, the residents. I mean, I think education is something that is so important. So it's just a really great opportunity for us to sort of study one small facet of the Lincolnville history. So we're just sort of getting started on all these. I think we've got all the artifacts washed. I'll have to check with Catherine on that. It took a long time. And this project happened over the summer too. So it's going to be a real interesting treat to go through some of these artifacts. So moving on to the final project that we worked on this year, that I feel like I lived on Kuna Street for a couple months at the very end of summer. It was an active construction site, so it was very challenging to bring volunteers out on this project. We had been working since probably mid-2020 at 12 Avenida Menendez, which some of y'all might know as the old Acapulco restaurant, or I think at one point it was Chimes. And it has been under renovation for almost a year and a half. And it's going to be the new River and Fort restaurant. It's got a beautiful view of the Castillo, so hence part of the name, River and Fort. And so we've been working inside the building and on the adjacent property to Kuna Street, starting, like I said, in the mid-2020, or actually maybe that was mid-2021. I don't know. It's hard to keep track, but we've been working there for quite some time. No, it would actually be mid-2020, sorry. But finally, as part of the project, there was going to be street improvements on Kuna Street. And this is the section of Kuna Street between Charlotte Street and Avenida Menendez. So I'll show you on a map in a minute. And it's sort of just south of the National Park Service parking lot. If any of y'all are familiar with where that is, it's that kind of triangle parking lot. So this is sort of the street between those, the new River and Fort restaurant and Avenida and the MPS parking lot. So the plans were, even though there were not really any known utilities down the street, the plans were to completely impact the entire road. So we had to look at everything within the footprint of this section of Kuna Street, this one block of Kuna Street. So here's a wonderful, I think many of y'all are familiar with the Puente map, our project area. This is Kuna Street here. This map dates to 1764. The work we're doing was right here. So Kuna Street has not always been Kuna Street. At one point, it was open land. It was, especially in the 17th century, we know that St. Augustine hadn't really migrated this far north yet. So a lot of this was open land. At some point when the Castillo was being constructed in the late 1600s, some of this area, based on archaeological data, was probably being used by some of the labor camps that were helping to build the Castillo. We found some archaeological evidence of occupation that doesn't match up to the street grid. And so keep in mind that where we're working, the street grid did not exist yet in the 1700s, in the 1600s, and not really in the beginning of the 1700s as well. What we do know is that this would have remained open land for the most part. In fact, it was good defensive practices to keep this area clear so that your enemy couldn't hide behind buildings as if they were trying to attack the Castillo. So in fact, anything that might have been constructed in that area during an attack might have actually been burned down to prevent being used by the enemy. We do know, however, in this part of town, this little tiny structure here is known as the King's Blacksmith Shop. We know at some point, somewhere between 1737, that Arredondo map I showed earlier with the missions, and 1763, that the blacksmith shop was moved from the fort grounds to this location. So it's still sort of on the larger fort grounds, but not right inside the fort. The blacksmith shop, the first iteration of it, fell into disrepair by 1792. And so the Spanish crown constructed a second smithy, as they're sometimes called, and it was completed by 1806. Now, back in the 60s, the National Park Service, remember how I mentioned the lot that was north of Kuna Street? So it would have been Kuna Street's here, the project area we're working. This would have been the north part of that road. The NPS and local archaeologists actually uncovered some of the foundations for the blacksmith shop, which you can see down here on the lower slide. And they were pretty substantial. So chances are it was the second blacksmith shop. It had very large, substantial coquina foundations. We know that blacksmith shop was 2-story. So it makes sense that this probably was the second blacksmith shop. And the remains of the blacksmith shop now sit under that National Park Service lot. But as time marches on, this little area of town, because it was undeveloped for so long, starts to get a little wonky. It kind of is a weird area of town. So here is the section of Kuna Street that we are working on, Bay Street. So this is Avenida Menendez here. And of course we have Charlotte Street here. And here is this weird open space. In fact, at one point, this was a park. Today, the road kind of travels this way and kind of truncates this lot. So this area is a little unique. The block isn't a nice square block as we kind of tend to think. I shouldn't say square, rectangular blocks. Our blocks in St. Augustine are a little loosey-goosey, but you know, they tend to kind of take more of a angular, rectangular form. So what happened in the late 1950s and early 1960s, Bay Street, what we now know as Avenida Menendez, undergoes a major transformation. The seawall is expanded. The seawall that existed is expanded. And you can see from this slide, this is taken from the Castillo, and our project area is right here. This is the old Bay Street. This is the seawall that's being constructed. And Avenida Menendez basically becomes expanded. And it becomes the 4-lane road that we know. It has a promenade built on it that we all enjoy today. And the old seawall gets buried underneath Avenida Menendez. And what's really interesting as how it relates to this project is at the same time, the path that we kind of know, that curve around Avenida Menendez that goes around the fort, that basically truncates this lot, truncates it in half, and kind of makes more of a triangular type of lot. We also know from historical records that the area of the fort, and I will pop back for a minute, this open area was, people were constantly complaining that if there was bad storms and nor'easters and high tides, people could not get to the fort because this area would become flooded. And what's kind of cool that we were able to find by working on this whole stretch of Kuna Street is evidence of how there was a natural high landform, which stretches back here. But then once you get to midway in the street, the landform just dives down. It just becomes like a deep slope. And that was something that really helped explain why some of the deposits were so shallow and why people were not developing on the bayfront, because they were very prone to flooding and the landform was just way too shallow or way too close to the water. And it's why we got the seawall, the original seawall that was built, and then why even later in the 20th century, people wanted to expand the seawall out here, is to help provide a buffer from the flooding and the nor'easters that we're all very familiar with. In fact, while we were working on this project, there was a lovely nor'easter that basically flooded the streets. So it's kind of interesting to look historically at some of the landscape and the landforms from a little bit of archaeology. In fact, it's probably the only place, Kuna Street, where some of that original landform still remains preserved. We would not have gotten that with underneath if we were digging underneath these buildings. We only were able to get a slice of it by working in an area that was a protected street, so to speak. And of course, when we do street work, it brings a lot of challenges for us because there are the impacts of linear utilities. And often when I talk to folks, they're like, oh, it's all torn up. There's nothing left. It's been utilities down the street. It's all disturbed. There's nothing to worry about. All the archaeology is gone. And I say, no, that is not true. Because with very careful excavation and using good scientific methods, we can tease so much out of a little bit of area in between municipal utilities. And I'm going to show you a little bit of some of the examples. So we know that starting in the 1880s, there was municipal utilities running down Kuna Street, even though none of them are active now. We have multiple utility lines, and you can kind of see that. Here's some of the example of some of the clay pipes. You can discern where the utility lines are based off of certain linear patterns and the modeling, the mixing of the soil, right? So if you're digging, you have a nice layer cake of soil, like different colors, and then you dig through all that and you mix it all up and you backfill it. It creates what we see here, this big modeled mess of different soils. So here's a great example of one. You can see this nice linear line. So I know that this, with the modeled soil and the very straight line, this is a utility trench, very easily distinguishable. Same thing over here. I'm actually standing on a pipe, this little iron pipe, and I can tell the same thing, that this is another utility trench. But in between the trenches right here, this is all still wonderfully preserved, and it's actually preserved underneath layers of roadbed. So that's one of the great things about a road, is that there's different layers of road that is constructed, and it helps preserve everything underneath it. So by careful excavation, we get these little slivers of intact deposits in road projects. So not all is lost. There's lots of information to glean, even if we're only kind of getting a linear sliver of the road. So some of the things that we were able to find is lots of stuff related to the blacksmith shop, as one would expect. So here's that National Park Service lot. This is Charlotte Street right here. This is the footprint of Kuna Street where we're working. Here's the new restaurant. So we know the black parts of the foundation are underneath this parking lot over here. And as to be expected, we were finding tons of iron flakes, iron concretions, which you can see here, tons of slag. And slag is basically a byproduct of metal manufacturing. So like when it's like all the impurities that are kind of removed from the metal, and it can be really gross looking. Sometimes it's very bulbous and actually kind of looks pretty. It's sort of iridescent, but it's a telltale sign that metal smithing is happening. And as expected, we're just finding gobs and gobs of slag. We're also finding a lot of artifacts that related to sort of military, like here's a lovely gun flint that we were finding. So it made sense that the artifacts that we were finding were probably in association with activity happening at the blacksmith shop. Because keep in mind, the blacksmith shop work predates most of Kuna Street existing. So this would have all been open space, and it wouldn't be tied into like the city grid that we think of. In addition to stuff associated with the blacksmith shop, we were also finding small finds, things that people would have lost, lots of straight pins. This is a tiny bone die. We also found a thimble, little things that people would probably drop and lose, which is pretty common in roadbed areas. But one of the things I think is probably the most exciting, potentially most exciting deposits that we found were actually those that could potentially, notice I'm using a lot of caveats, potentially predate the Spanish occupation of urban downtown St. Augustine. We know from some other projects that the city archaeology program's done that there is discrete Native American pre-Spanish contact. There's an occupation right along the bayfront. We're only finding it on a handful of projects north of the plaza. If any of y'all are familiar with the Monson Motor Lodge, that was one of those projects. Meehan's Irish Pub, we actually were able to do some radiocarbon dates from some charred wood in some wooden posts. And we're able to finally date these two different radiocarbon dates came back. And the radiocarbon dates are all kind of in alignment of around 1260. So that's about 300 years prior to Spanish occupation in St. Augustine. So we know that there is maybe not an intense habitation, but definitely some type of occupation along the bayfront. And we found what we think might be more evidence of that along Kuna Street. There's several features. None of them had any slag. They had no European items, no ceramics, no glass, just they were pure and clean, which is very rare on an urban site. Normally, you always are finding stuff mixed in. And given the volume of slag we were finding, it was strange that we weren't finding any slag in these particular features. One feature, which was pretty amazing, was all razor clam and very little shell or oyster, which is normally the, I said clam or oyster rather. It's pretty typical actually. We find clam and oyster all the time. That's the most common types of shellfish that we do find. But this was almost pure razor clam, real thin razor clams. And that is actually very challenging to harvest. You have to actually chase the clams, like they're moving and they're burrowing down into the sand. So you have to hand collect razor clams. And so this is a reflection of a lot of effort, and you probably weren't getting that much meat out of it. So we're not sure what this pit was, what it means that it's just razor clam. But it's very curious. Also within that same pit is this wonderful shell cup that you can see that FPAN did a fantastic 3D model of. And so it is clearly a part of a whelk that has been shaped and smoothed to be sort of like a dipper cup. And so we're not quite sure what to make of this particular razor clam with a shell cup feature, but we're definitely hoping to send some radiocarbon dates off from a couple of these features and see what dates come back and see if they are hitting around that 1200 AD mark, or, you know, maybe there's something later. Maybe they're a Native American feature associated with indigenous labor from the labor camps when the Castillo was being constructed. It seems a little unlikely that last possibility, because normally you still would find some European items mixed in with those trash pits, and we weren't finding anything. So we're pretty excited about that aspect of our research, and we'll just, you know, you got to stay tuned. That's part of the thing when we're doing work. We don't really know a lot of our interpretations till we really get into that other 75% of the archaeology, which is the analysis and interpretation. So it's still really cool, and we're pretty excited about the possibility. Couple other quick things to wrap up real quick. We had some grant work finish up. Before this year, we had no idea where all of our almost 1,000 projects had been located in terms of mapped and plotted. So with some matching funds from both this City Commission as well as the Department of State Division of Historical Resources as part of a small matching grant, we were able to hire Paleo West to help us finally get some GIS data together and plot almost all of our projects especially those outside of colonial downtown, on a map. So you can see all of these. This map is an example of different archaeological zones. And then all of these shaded polygons are actually where we've done projects. And now we have a lot of great information in GIS about some of those projects. You know, the level of effort, what type of work was being done, did we do test units, what was found. So it's going to be a great research tool for us. And as part of that, we also were able to georeference a lot of, or get PaleoWest to georeference a lot of historical maps and a lot of environmental data. So we're excited to really sink our teeth into those. Just as a teaser, Catherine just presented at SHA a couple days ago, actually, and just sort of showing where projects we've been done that have mission components, right? So that's just one thing that we can do with this data in a spatial geodatabase. And you can kind of see where a lot of those projects are turning up positive, which is the green, and where they are turning up negative. So there's a lot of things that we can start doing. And so that's subject for another presentation. So you'll just have to wait on that one. Tying back into our mission theme, we also got a education grant from DHR to put together several story maps. These are interactive websites, and we've went ahead and published one that's on the missions, that these 18th century refugee missions that I was talking about earlier. And so I highly recommend you guys check it out if you haven't already. It's a really great kind of condensed interactive. It both has GIS, so you can interactively zoom onto maps and look at things, but it also has a lot of other cool videos and different interpretation, different interpretive information on what we do know about the mission communities of St. Augustine. And we're going to be showcasing and launching a few more in this coming year. So we're pretty excited about those. We also, in conjunction, in terms of archaeology, we've had a lot of historic preservation grants, but one of the ones that has incorporated some archaeology is to rewrite the National Historic Landmark downtown district, our downtown colonial walled city NHL. And it is including archaeology, which is fantastic. A lot of times you get historic districts and people think about the built environment, but if you have historic buildings, there's a good chance you also have archaeology associated with that historic occupation. So this is a great way to include the archaeology in the revamp of the NHL, the National Historic Landmark designation for downtown. So we're very excited. We just got comments back from DHR. So hopefully it'll be going to the National Park Service this year. So stay tuned on that too. I know I've talked for a very long time, and I think I could probably talk for another several hours, but I'm going to try to wrap it all up. I just wanted to recognize the hard work that Catherine Sims has done with so many facets. She's kind of a Jacqueline of all trades. I'm not sure what the proper word would be. But anyway, she's fantastic and has done so much in a very trying year. We also, Carl Halbert has been great at supporting us, even though he's now retired, he can't keep away. And we have a great historic preservation staff. We are part of the historic preservation division in the planning and building department. We've had some staffing changes across the city actually this year. So we have a new historic preservation officer after Jenny Wolf left. Julie Courtney has taken over. And we also have a new historic preservation planner, I believe, soon. So lots of changes happening, lots of staffing challenges that are occurring within all of city government. But we are supported as part of city government by a wonderful group of IT professionals and our own planning and building staff. And we have a great working relationship with a lot of our utilities and streets and grounds groups. So we really couldn't do a lot of what we do without all of their support. Additionally, we couldn't do what we do with all of our volunteers. It's been so great to reconnect with so many of you guys this year. And even though we haven't gotten to share as much field and lab time as we would like, it's always great to be able to enjoy each other's company and all share in the joy of the archaeology process. So we thank you for all your hard work and dedication. Our numbers, volunteer numbers, have been up a little bit in terms of hours this year compared to last year. I think I had last year a really sad graph where it just nosedived once the pandemic hit. But it's been good to be able to bring back at least some opportunities for volunteers. It's still a little tricky, and we'll see what 2022 brings. So who knows? But I just wanted to thank everybody. I could go on, but I'll wrap it up. And I don't know if there needs to be questions. I don't know. I don't know how much time.
Yeah, we can take a few questions. You could just,
I mean, I'm going to back out of my stop sharing.
definitely.
Yeah.
Anyone who does have a question, you can just unmute yourself and ask it, and I'm sure Andrea can answer it.
Or you can type them too, if you really wanted to. I don't know if I have everybody's.
No questions.
Either everybody is still asleep or, you know, I covered everything so well. Just
I
kidding.
have
You
a
did, you
question.
did.
Yeah.
I dug with Carl Halbert back in the 90s, and I live in Jacksonville, and I just rejoined this group
Mhm.
this past year. So I don't get a quarterly newsletter. I don't know what Fish Island is, and I wanted to ask what the markers are. Those are my three questions, because I'm not familiar with any of that.
Yeah, I can probably fill you in on most of it. Fish Island, if you're familiar with the 312 bridge
Mm-hmm.
connecting Anastasia Island with the mainland, there's a hunk of land that people wanted to develop. There was a group of people who fought it, the Friends of Fish Island, and it's now a preserve. I believe the state bought it, and I believe they deeded it to the city. But that's what Fish Island, it's a passive park that's in the process of being improved with signage and whatever. The newsletter, if you're a member, you should be getting the letter. I don't know when you joined, but we can check that out. And what was your third question?
My third question was, what are the markers that you're buying or
There's
paying?
a number of historic markers that you find around St. Augustine.
Okay.
Some of them are put up by the state, some are put up by the city, and we put up some as well. And we normally collect money at our meetings that we have live through a 50-50 raffle.
Mm-hmm.
And that money is going towards the markers. And that's what Nick talked about earlier. I think we have $1,800 in that fund, and there will be a marker. We'll announce where it is shortly.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Those answer my questions. Thank
Very
you.
good. And we'll look into, why you didn't get the newsletter. Probably it's only published quarterly. You might have just missed it.
Right. And that's okay. I mean, this has been a weird year. So
It certainly has. Any other questions for Andrea? If not, we're going to go to the name that artifact, and maybe Andrea can help us, because I don't know what it is. Okay, what is it?
What is it? All right. I have a reveal for the second half of it. I don't know, the second slide. I don't know if you have that up or not.
No, that's
It's
the
a-
only one I had.
Oh,
It's
okay.
a shot glass. Is it
Yeah.
a shot glass?
It's very close to a shot glass. It's actually a communion cup. Actually, it's two
Ah.
communion cups that we found. Well, I should preface that is when we did a quick Google search, it actually called it a ritual vessel, which is not wrong. So for those of you that might be in at least the Christian faiths, they are used to drink or sip wine or grape juice sort of when you're doing, like, it represents the blood of Christ during the religious communion. And so they are kind of similar to a shot glass, I guess you could say. But we actually found these at First Baptist Church when it was undergoing renovations, First Baptist Church in Lincolnville. And the fact that we found two of them, you know, I saw one and I was like, I think I know what this is. And then we found another. And so it makes total sense finding it in the location that we did. So
Is that
very-
thing on the bottom, is that a top or what is that?
no, it's actually, so this is, oh, I don't have my pointer on. So the one on the bottom is just sort of what's left of
That's-
one of them. Like it's the heavy base that's
Okay,
been broken off. And then the one on the top in Catherine's hand has a little bit more of both the actual hollow vessel and the heavy glass base. They're all glass. They would have been molded glass.
Mhm.
okay,
Yeah.
super.
If,
Yeah.
if they were Baptist, they were grape juice. 'Cause
Yes,
They wouldn't have been
and
drinking
so
wine.
that's what I always remember getting grape juice and never getting wine, but
Yeah.
you know, I guess it depends on which, you know, denomination, or if you're Catholic, like, you know, there's a lot more that tends to go, whether you're getting grape juice or wine with your communion.
Well, Angie, I want to thank you for the presentation. It was excellent.
Yeah.
I'm sure
Oh,
everybody
and you know
enjoyed it, and we're looking
Somehow-
forward to your presentation next year.
All right. I'm going to do one small plug because somehow that slide got deleted. One of our other things that we did this year is launch Instagram. So it's at City St. Aug Archaeology. And that's where we've been trying our best, especially with the pandemic, to do a lot more of our outreach. So it's worth checking out to follow us. We launched it in April, and I can't believe that slide got deleted. But anyway, it's worth checking out. If you see the communion cups featured sometime in the near future, don't give it away. We try to do some of those artifacts on our Instagram as well. So
Okay, super.
awesome.
Just a couple of comments before we close. I noticed a lot of people were coming in late. If you want to see the whole meeting and you missed some of the presentation, it should be on YouTube tomorrow. So you can just search SAAA on YouTube or St. Augustine Archaeology Association. The next meeting is going to be February 8th. We normally have it the first Tuesday of the month. February is going to be the second Tuesday. The location, hopefully we'll have it alive at the Flagler Room, but stay tuned. If things don't work out, we may have to go back to Zoom, but in the meantime, you can mark your calendar, the 8th of February, 7 o'clock, and we'll hope to see you all there. And with that, we wish you a happy new year, and we'll end the meeting.